If you are earning $95,000 a year right now, you probably think of yourself as solidly middle class. If you are between 55 and 65, that number is not telling you the truth. The standard reports say middle class in Australia runs anywhere from $53,000 to $310,000 a year. That range is so wide, it tells you almost nothing about what your retirement is actually going to look like. It comes down to whether you own your home outright and how much sits in your super, not what you earned at work. A person on a modest income with the paid-off house can retire with more real freedom than someone on a high income still carrying a mortgage. I have watched people in their 60s compare themselves to the wrong number. They look at their old salary, feel proud or feel behind, and miss the one detail that decides everything. A comfortable retirement lifestyle for one person costs around $54,840 a year, according to ASFA. The full age pension for a single person is $31,223 a year. That gap of roughly $23,000 a year is the real distance between classes, and it has almost nothing to do with what you used to earn at work. Today, we are going through the 3 real classes of retirement in Australia, using the actual 2026 numbers, not the vague income brackets from a government report. And there is a trap sitting in the middle of it, one that can cost a middle-income retiree close to $5,000 a year in extra tax they never needed to pay. If you are in that window between 55 and 65 and you want to know exactly where you stand, stick around. This is what we focus on here, every week, for people getting ready to leave work in Australia. In 2026, the floor of what we are calling the lower class is not really about income at all. It is the age pension. The maximum rate is $31,223 a year for a single person and $47,070 a year for a couple once you add the pension and energy supplements together. A lot of people hear that number and picture someone struggling. That is not always what is happening. Many Australians living on the age pension are homeowners. They worked for decades, paid off the house, and moved on to the pension because their super was never designed to replace a full working wage forever. That is not a planning failure. For plenty of people, it is a deliberate trade: keep the family home, accept a lower cash income, and let the pension top up the rest. This happens because super in this country was built to work alongside the pension, not replace it completely for everyone. It was designed as one leg of the system, with the pension underneath it as the safety net. For someone who spent decades in a modest-paying job or took years out to raise a family, that safety net is not a consolation prize. It is the system doing exactly what it was built to do. Here is the part that surprises people who have not looked closely at the rules. The family home is completely exempt from the assets test. A couple can own a $2 million house in Sydney and still receive the full pension of $47,070 a year, as long as their other assets, savings, shares, and super combined sit under $499,000. Break that down fortnightly, and a single pensioner is looking at about $1,200.90 every 2 weeks. That is not a lot of money. But if the roof over your head is already paid for, it goes a lot further than the same number would for someone still renting. And that is the trap inside this bracket. If you are on this income and you do not own your home, the numbers stop working. The maximum rent assistance on top of the pension runs around $184 a fortnight. The median rent in Sydney alone is $824 a week. That gap does not close. It grows every year rent goes up, and the pension does not. So, if you own your home outright on this income, you are in a far stronger position than the raw dollar figure suggests. If you do not, this is the bracket that deserves the most attention and the most planning well before you get here. Now flip that around. What if you are earning double the pension, comfortably above it, and you assume that puts you safely in the middle class. You might be, or you might actually be worse off than the pensioner next door, and it comes down to one asset most people forget to count. The middle class range you see quoted, $53,000 to $310,000, sounds like one group of people. It is actually two very different worlds, and the split is not about income, it is about housing. Picture two men, both 62, both earning $100,000 a year right now. Call them Gary and Gary, because this happens often enough that it might as well be the same name. The first Gary has $500,000 in super and a paid-off house in Adelaide. The second Gary also has decent savings, $300,000 in super, but he still pays $650 a week in rent. On paper, before retirement, they look almost identical, same postcode type, same car in the driveway, same weekly shop. After retirement, they are not in the same class at all. The number that actually matters here is not the super balance. It is what is left over after housing, what you could call residual income. Gary with the paid-off house draws around 5% from his super, about $25,000 a year, and tops that up with a part pension, landing on roughly $45,000 a year. His housing cost is $0. His residual income is the full $45,000. Gary, who rents, draws the same 5% from a smaller balance, about $15,000 a year, plus a part pension, landing on roughly $35,000 a year. That sounds close to the first Gary, but his rent runs $33,800 a year. Once that comes out, he is left with about $1,200 for everything else: food, transport, medical costs, the lot. Same income bracket, same age, a housing gap of well over $400,000 in real terms once you account for what a paid-off home would have cost to buy. None of this means Gary, who rents, did something wrong. Renting through your 50s is common. Prices moved faster than wages for a long stretch, and plenty of people simply never had a deposit ready at the right moment. The point is not blame. The point is knowing which Gary you are before you make decisions based on a super balance alone. There is an emotional side to this too, not just a financial one. Knowing your rent cannot go up next year changes how you sleep at night. In a way, a slightly bigger super balance never quite manages to do. That is not something the official income brackets measure, but it is very real once you are living it. I used to tell people the goal was simple: save more, and the rest would sort itself out. I was wrong about that, at least for this group. For someone in the middle income bracket, in their late 50s or 60s, the balance in the super account matters less than whether the roof over your head is paid for or not. A bigger balance does not fix a rent bill that follows you into your 80s. If you are in a position closer to the renting Gary, the standard advice you hear, invest more, put it in shares, chase growth, is not wrong exactly. It is aimed at the wrong problem. You need a different lever, and part of that lever sits inside a tax offset most people your age have never really looked at closely. It is worth 5 minutes of your time before we get there. Most people know the basic tax-free threshold, $18,200. Far fewer people over 65 know the number that actually decides how much tax they pay once they retire, the seniors and pensioners tax offset. If you are single and over 65, and your taxable income stays under $36,034, you keep the full offset and end up paying little to no net tax. Go over that line, and the offset does not disappear all at once. It shades out at 12.5 cents for every dollar above the threshold, quietly in the background, without a letter or a warning telling you it is happening. I have seen people find this out at tax time, holding a notice of assessment that does not match what they expected, wondering why a modest pension payment from an old defined benefit fund pushed them over a line they never knew existed. This is bracket creep, and it is not just something that happens to people still working. If your super drawdowns push your taxable income up or an untaxed pension component adds to it, you can cross that line without meaning to and lose part of an offset you did not know you were relying on. Since the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, thresholds like this one have not always kept pace with inflation. The age pension gets indexed twice a year. Offset thresholds like this one are not guaranteed the same treatment, which means the value of the offset can quietly shrink in real terms even when the dollar figure on the page looks unchanged. There is a trade-off sitting underneath this. Some people take a large lump sum out of super early, thinking it simplifies things. Others move into a transition to retirement income stream instead, drawing a smaller, steadier amount. The lump sum can push your assessable income up hard in 1 year and cost you the offset for that year. The steady stream tends to be gentler on it. This is exactly why people with real wealth in this country stop worrying about their income number and start worrying about structure, where the money sits and how it is taxed, instead of how much of it there is. That shift, from asking how much do I earn to asking how is this taxed, is the real dividing line between the middle of this country and the top of it. The upper class in this country is not really defined by a $310,000 salary. It is defined by a number most high-income earners have never heard of, the transfer balance cap, which sits at $2.1 million from the 1st of July 2026. That figure is not about how much you earn. It is about how much of your money you are allowed to move into the part of super where earnings are taxed at 0%, the pension phase. Get money into that phase, and the growth on it, the dividends, the interest, none of it gets taxed the way it would if the same money sat in your own name outside super. Picture two versions of someone earning $400,000 a year. In the first version, the money stays largely in their personal name. Every dollar over the top threshold gets taxed at 45 cents, plus the Medicare levy on top of that. Year after year, the tax office takes a serious share before anything even gets invested. In the second version, that person uses the non-concessional cap, up to $130,000 a year, to move as much as the rules allow into the 0% pension environment. Same income, same starting point. Completely different outcome 20 years later, because $1 was taxed at close to half its value every single year, and the other was not. This is not a one-year trick either. It compounds. A dollar shielded from tax at 55 still has a decade or two to grow before it ever needs to be drawn down, and every year spent in that 0% environment is a year that was not quietly handed over to the tax office instead. That is the real difference between the two paths. One leaves you exposed to bracket creep for the rest of your working life. The other makes you effectively tax immune on everything up to $2.1 million. None of this requires a flashy lifestyle or a big house to show for it. Some of the wealthiest retirees I have come across live quite plainly. The difference was never visible from the outside. It was always in how the money was structured, not how it was spent. But do not get too comfortable with that number. Even someone sitting on $2 million across their accounts can drop out of the upper class overnight, and it usually is not tax that does it. It is one bad shock hitting at the wrong time. None of the numbers so far mean much until you run them through a bad year, because bad years happen to everyone eventually. Picture a 20% drop in the share market landing at the same time as a health scare that costs $50,000 out of pocket. Not an unusual combination. Markets and bodies both tend to let you down without warning. Gary, who rents from before, gets hit hardest here. He has to sell super investments at the bottom of the market just to cover rent and medical bills because there is no cash sitting on the side. Those units never really recover, even once the market comes back, because he sold low and the recovery happens on a smaller balance. Someone who planned ahead handles the same shock very differently. They keep roughly 3 years of spending sitting in cash or term deposits, separate from anything invested in the market. When the drop happens, they simply do not touch the growth assets. They let them sit and recover on their own time. And because they have kept some private health cover, funded partly by the tax savings they built up earlier, a chunk of that $50,000 health bill is already covered before it hits their pocket. Australians are now spending an average of $1,634 a year out of pocket on health costs, the single biggest slice of health spending that does not come from the government. That number climbs fast the moment something serious happens. The gap between the fragile version of the middle class and the resilient version of the upper class is not a $300,000 salary. It is a handful of decisions made years before the bad year ever arrives. This is not about predicting the next crash. It is about being able to shrug when it happens instead of scrambling. Here is where this actually becomes useful. 3 things worth checking before the financial year moves on, each one worth a few minutes of your time. First, the concessional cap. It sits at $32,500 for this financial year. If your total super balance is under $500,000, you can use the carry forward rules to add more than that in a single year, sometimes well over $100,000 if you have had a windfall, an inheritance, a redundancy payout, or simply a year where you can afford to put more away. This rule exists specifically so a single bad year at work, or one very good year, does not lock you out of catching up later. Second, the SAP to check. If you are over 65, keep an eye on your taxable income relative to $36,034. Staying under that line as a single person keeps your full offset intact. This is worth checking every year, not just once, because drawdown amounts and other income can shift year to year. Third, the housing pivot. If you are still renting in your 60s, look at the downsizer contribution rules the next time you sell a property, even a small one, and weigh a guaranteed roof over your head against a portfolio that might grow but does not guarantee you anywhere to live. Growth is not the same thing as safety, and at this stage of life, safety usually matters more. None of this is about chasing the biggest possible number. It is about making sure the money you already have is not quietly leaking away somewhere you are not looking. One more thing, and it catches people off guard every time. Most people hear the phrase tax-free super and stop paying attention right there. But if you never check the split between the tax-free and taxable components inside your account, your adult children could lose around 17% of what is left to the tax office the day you pass it on to them. That is not a small detail. That is thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands, handed over simply because nobody ever checked. So when someone asks what class you are in Australia in 2026, the honest answer has nothing to do with the label on a government report. It comes down to 2 things: what is left over after your housing is paid for, and how efficiently what you have got is actually structured. A pensioner with a paid-off home can be in a stronger position than someone earning 3 times as much, still paying off a mortgage and handing over needless tax every year. Whether you are living on the age pension or sitting on a portfolio worth $2 million, the goal underneath all of it is the same. Not the biggest number possible. Just enough room to make choices, instead of having the choices made for you. If this helped you work out where you actually stand, stick around. This channel is built for exactly this window, the years right before you stop working, so the middle class trap does not catch you the way it catches so many people who never stop to check.